Hello and welcome to today's webinar. Glad to have you back for another episode of CISO Insights. I'm Dan Lorman. I'm the field CISO with Presidio, and it is great to be back with another topic, Earl. And welcome back for a March session on strategic security planning.
Yeah, this is great to be back, and I think it's been almost exactly a year since or 3 years since we did our first episode together way back when. So it's good to see we're still going. Dan and I are still getting along. We're 3 years in and I'm still going strong. We're on episode 11 of this series, so we're doing good. Glad to be back.
Yeah, I think this topic today is one that we're just going to do a brief introduction here before we bring in our two guests from Rapid7. We're really excited about today's session. It's a topic that I'm kind of passionate about, and it may seem pretty boring to some, but if you're responsible for planning, and we've all heard that line: if you fail to plan, you plan to fail. And so strategic security planning, cybersecurity planning, different flavors of that. I am very, very excited about and passionate about this topic. So I'm really excited about hearing your perspective and all your years at Lear and all the different roles you've had. Any opening words on that topic before we bring in our guests?
Yeah, I mean, you said a word that, you said, this isn't exciting. A lot of times strategic planning is not exciting, it's boring, but a lot of the important things are boring. A lot of the important things just, you have to put the time in, you have to put the effort into it. And, you want it to be boring so that the other side of that isn't exciting, which is usually a bad thing if you don't plan correctly and you run into a big problem because you don't have enough people or you don't have enough resources to deal with the situation. So hopefully it is boring and it is, something that you just kind of do in the course of your day.
Well, you and I can disagree on that point, because I don't think this is boring, but maybe some people do.
Hey, you said it, Dan. You said, hey, this may not be the most exciting topic.
It can be boring. Okay.
I just picked up on that.
Well, let's just jump right in and bring in our two guests from Rapid7. We are so excited to be bringing in both Aaron Herndon and Josh Har from Rapid7. Aaron, why don't you just give us a little bit of background on yourself and tell us your role at Rapid7, and welcome to today's show.
Well, thanks, Dan. Thanks, Earl. I'm really happy to be here today and be able to talk about this. Off of your is it boring or is it interesting, I'm going to have to agree. Coming from a background of trying to implement some of these strategies and then implement policies, it was boring. That's why I moved over. My role nowadays, I hack things. I try to make it interesting for you. So you build this great plan and I come in and try to knock over those dominoes, right? And then tell you how you did it. So that's actually my role at Rapid7. I'm one of our principal security consultants, and I focus on red team operations. But I still have a lot of, mix in policy and helping organizations guide their programs. Because after we hack something, I don't want to, walk away and be like, here's your issues and not help you out, right? I want to give you guidance. I want to help you create that strategy to take the next step. And that's actually where Josh plays a huge role at Rapid7 as well. So I'll kick it over to him.
Welcome, Josh.
Thanks, Dan and Earl. I'm just going to say that I'm on Team Dan for this one. I love strategic security planning, so I think we have a split decision here. But my name is Josh Har. I'm a lead security consultant for the strategic advisory services of Rapid7. Essentially, I partner with organizations to help build their strategies out and their programs out. I enjoy this planning. I've done planning in the DoD space and other government spaces as well, and really kind of like to ask these more coaching questions on understanding the resources available for organizations to start their planning. So it's really exciting to kind of get that feedback and move forward. And I'm just really excited to talk about this topic today.
Great, thanks. Well, we have a poll question we want to start with for the audience, and so you're going to see this on your screen. It's a very simple question, and we'd love to hear your answers and maybe just kind of begin the conversation with the panel on this. But the question really is this: do you have a current cybersecurity strategy in your organization? Do you? And it could be part of another plan, it could be a standalone, but do you have a current written down, something can look at, or at least online, cybersecurity strategy in your organization? And the answers are really simple: yes, no, or I don't know, I'm not sure. So please give us your answers. And I'd love to hear that. And then we're going to start with just go down, talk with Earl, and then Josh and Aaron, just maybe some initial thoughts on this. Earl, I know you were CISO at Lear Corporation, a global powerhouse in the auto sector. What were your experiences with this around cybersecurity strategies, and any opening thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, it's the foundation. I mean, it's usually the first thing I do. I've been the CISO at 3 different organizations, and the first thing you do is you kind of go in and assess what you have, because normally what they tell you have, you don't have when you show up. And so you kind of got to look at that. But then, yeah, that's when the strategic planning comes into place. So you say, look, we're in this kind of industry. We have this kind of threat actor, so this is the capability that we need to have to really defend this company. And then from that, you start to build I usually build a 3-year plan, because much beyond that, the technology may not even be there to do what you need to do. So, I really build these like 3-year strategic plans with, an underlying budget to that. And to me, that's a must. You have to do that when you first walk in the door in order to even have a shot at, usually there's some cultural change that has to happen. And that strategic plan is a good way of kind of signaling to the rest of the organization where that cultural change is going to have to happen.
Yeah, I think.
Go ahead, Josh.
I think that's a great point. When a commander comes into a new unit, they normally have a commander's intent, and that is essentially their strategy moving forward with the unit or whatever they're driving and leading. The same for a security strategy. You need that intent that is aligned with the business, so that it's aligning smartly with the business, so that you get better buy-in, and it does start that communicative, collaborative process that is needed, especially when you're trying to drive security forward. It's in an organization.
Yeah, so we've got some results, Aaron. I want to hear your thoughts, but I want to also give you a chance to respond to the poll results. So results have just come in. We got about 44% of you that say, yeah, we got a plan. 33% saying no, you do not have a plan, and then 22% don't know. So we got 55% either don't have a plan or don't know if you have a plan. I mean, any thoughts on that, Aaron? Then any other comments you want to make on the importance of this?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's really important to have a plan. So if you're in that no 33%, figure out a plan. Like, you need a strategic plan moving forward, or else your teams won't be aligned, right? Like, you got to get the buy-in at a high level for everyone to be on the same page and let them know where you're coming from. And actually, Earl, you kind of said it at one of your opening lines when you created, your first points, that you need to know your threat actor, right? I'm going to kind of harp on this topic, obviously, my background, but knowing what you're trying to protect, because at the end of the day, you're not going to create a plan that encompasses everything, right? You can't just walk and be like, everything's going to be secure. We're going to have, A to Z. You got to come in and understand your organization's risks. Are you healthcare? Do you need to protect patient data? And you need to make sure that your hospitals don't get ransomware. Are you a bank? You need to protect financials. That's information and also loss of money. Are you a critical national services? You got to keep power on. Focus on those areas. Build a plan that you can really sell to your board or your C-suite that says, this is what we're going to target, and now let me break it down on how, because that way you can get your buy-in and you know what you're working towards. I can't tell you how many times people don't have a plan and they just say, we're going to patch everything. They follow these audit frameworks, and then at the end of the day, someone comes in to test it, and it's like, yeah, you did a great job patching everything, but that file share over here with all the social security numbers is just sitting open. Like, I just logged into it as any user. Your plan didn't encompass protecting that. And that gets more down into the implementation of it. But at a high level, you got to know what you're looking to protect and focus on it.
Well, I think that's a good point there too, of why you want this documented, is so that you can get the consensus from the rest of the organization, because it doesn't do any good for the CISO to say, hey, yeah, I'm going to double the size of my SOC. I'm going to, go, triple my technology spend, and I'm going to, lock this place down. And then you walk over to the CFO and none of it gets funded because they're like, hey, I had no idea this was coming. So the strategic plan really allows you to have those conversations with the rest of the organization, so that, you make sure you have the proper funding. You got, HR knows that there's maybe hires coming in the next 6 months or 12 months. So it's really a way of articulating your desires as a new CISO, and then getting the rest of the leadership to kind of feed back to you what you're actually going to be able to accomplish.
Yeah, I think that's I mean, aligning with the business is so important. You have so many supporting business units throughout the organization, and there might be a ton of lines of revenue or lines of risk that need to be focused on from the business. So the business kind of helps inform you to align those security strategies and allow your business units to collaborate with you, because the last thing you need is to be on your own island with security, trying to move things forward, and no one's helping you. There needs to be this collaborative partnership throughout the organization that the strategic plan allows you to build.
So on that point, I'll just come right back to that. So people probably wondering, what are the core components of a good cybersecurity strategy, and like what are the kind of must-haves or nice-to-haves? And I'd like to hear comments from all of you. Start with Josh, jump to Aaron, and also Earl. Anything, I know, it could be, obviously we have different industries. They're not all going to be the same. I mean, clearly, maybe transportation is different than, state police. I do a lot of government work, but banks could be different than hospitals. But what are the core components of a good plan?
Yeah, I think one of the first components that I would want to see in a strategic plan, and that I write in, is aligning with the risks. So articulate those risks to the business that are needing to be protected and secured. So if you can identify those risks and you can smartly articulate them within the plan, and then align those pillars, and I'm sorry, it's in my head with the national cybersecurity strategy, but align those pillars up with those risks, you are able to have conversations with the business. Well, I'm in human resources, and I think that I can help you with pillar 3 is building the workforce or whatnot. So I want to see the risks, and then align that with your security strategy, your security components to protect that risk or mitigate specific risks within that pillar. I think that is the first and foremost component that I would like to see, because it aligns with the executive board as well as the line of business and line of revenue or line of risk if you're not making revenue from critical infrastructure.
Before we go jump to you guys, I just want to say we are going to jump back to the national strategy, and I mean, I think it kind of teed up the timing of this, and the fact that just came out last week, a couple weeks ago, is really key. But Earl, I'll jump over to you and I'll get back to Aaron. But I want to just what are the, at a high level, before we dive into what needs to be inside of each of these buckets. I mean, I'm just thinking in my mind 7 to 10 buckets. I mean, and maybe you guys are thinking about this differently than I am, but what would those buckets be for you, Earl?
Yeah, I was even more simplistic than that, because I'm just kind of a meat and potatoes kind of guy. So my plans usually started, like Josh said, I'd say, here's the industry that we're in, here's kind of the risk landscape that we're dealing with, or the threat landscape we're dealing with. So like when I was at Lear, it was a global organization. We had tons of intellectual property that state actors would want globally. So it's a very large threat landscape. And so you kind of lay that out. But then, the rest of it is just very simple: people, process, and technology. And, I would just say, look, in order to defend this organization against this threat landscape, given what's here today, in a people standpoint, we're going to have to, maybe it's consolidate some organizations into security. It's going to be getting training for a different group of people. So you talk about the people piece. Then you move to the process piece. So, like I walked into an organization and they had very little around detection and response. And so I'm like, all right, first thing we got to do is we really got to shore up detection and response capabilities. We got to improve vulnerability management processes. Our identity management processes aren't good. So you just break it down by the processes where you're going to have to shore those things up. And then you move to the technology. And I would lay out a 3-year technology map or a roadmap that says, there's very little in detection and response. So we need to build a SIM. We need to, uplift our endpoint detection and response capabilities. And so, like, to me, that's how I did it. There was 4 buckets for me, the why, and then the 3 whats. And that's kind of how I drove it in the, where I go.
Aaron, anything to add to that?
I mean, I actually completely agree with that. Putting it into buckets that are at this high level, touching back to the pillars concept, I like that when I looked at the national cybersecurity strategy, because it's clear cut, right? You come in and you're able to communicate it to your teams. This is what we're going to do. You're not getting into the nitty gritty details yet in it. It's just getting everyone on that same page. I think, the bucket you mentioned of the process, that is one that is so often overlooked. So I'm glad you said that, because I feel like there's a lot of people who come in and they're like, oh, here's the area I need to secure, and here's a technology I'm going to implement. But at the end of the day, technology isn't end all be all, right? There's a huge component of process that needs to be there, and I feel like it's missed. And that's actually what I was going to add. So I'm really glad you said that, Earl.
Yeah, I was just having a conversation earlier today about that. Most people look at technology first, and they don't even really think about it in the right order, because the right order should be people, process, and technology, so that your technology is actually enabling the processes that you need to enable the people that you have in place. If you do it in reverse order, you end up with a lot of tech debt that is just unused technology, because you haven't built your processes out right to figure out what you're even trying to accomplish. Sorry, Dan.
Hey guys, and I want to definitely dig a little deeper into that, and I'll remind the audience again, we want to hear your questions as well. So please get your questions in. We're going to get to the audience questions here in about 15 minutes, bottom of the hour, and definitely want to have more of a discussion about what you want us to talk about. So get those questions in now. The quicker you get them in, the more likely you're going to get a response from the expert panel. I'd love to hear, any stories about building one, guys. And I'll start with a quick story. So, I mean, obviously, one of the things I think might be going through the minds of the audience, if I were sitting on the other side of this listening, is you've got tactical plans, you've got strategies, you've even got statewide plans. So when I was chief security officer in Michigan, I actually helped lead teams and did a lot of writing. Those who know me know I write a lot. I write for CSO Magazine, Government Technology Magazine. I blog a lot. I've written 3 books, and I'm a writer. I like to write, but we actually had, when we talk about bringing the people together, we had some strategies that were like statewide strategies, and like the national strategies, like the strategy for the nation, and then you have maybe a strategy for your, and we can get back to this, Earl. We think about Lear. You got global units all over the world. How do you bring all that together? In state of Michigan, I know. I'll just mention 2011 when we brought a new strategy in under Governor Rick Snyder in Michigan, and it was really bringing together all different parts of the state, so the K through 12 community, the universities, the hospitals, the automotive sector in Detroit, economic development aspects of that, criminal justice aspects of that, bringing in state police, bringing in all these different diverse domains, if you will, even hospitals, and okay, what are we as a state doing? And one of the things we did is getting all the stakeholders in the room and saying, we kind of did an as is to be gap analysis approach. So what are all the wonderful things we've done the last few years? Here's what we've accomplished. There's a little bit of bragging in there, a letter from the governor up front, and here's my vision. Here's why this is important, which, by the way, similar to national strategy, same kind of thing you saw from the president. Here's my, strategy. Here's some of the things we've accomplished. Here's kind of where we've been. Here's where we want to be, in 3 years, 4 years. And then here are the steps we're taking to get there. That's kind of another approach. Obviously, it's a little different than an individual company, especially a small company that might be looking more at their individual situation in their company. So I'd love to hear your thoughts. Maybe start over here with Josh, but then Earl as well. And Aaron, I'd love to hear, how do you think about that tactical versus strategic versus statewide versus national? I mean, I mean, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think so. I look at it. I look at it from a pyramid, if you'd like. You'd have the strategic level at the top. You have your operational level, and you have your tactical level. I'm always trying to fit any tasks or action items in those three buckets. And if it aligns with the strategic, okay, great. So I start there. I learned this from a mentor of mine who was just like, you need to start thinking strategically here. I was always in the weeds and things, and allow the strategy to operationalize into tactics. That's the best way. One of the stories, just yesterday, I was having a conversation with a friend and colleague who works in the government space, and he's on the receiving end of the lack of a strategy that was given to him. And he just said, like, your urgency is not my priority because I wasn't given the strategy to help collaborate. And so, there's a potential lag in a project because it wasn't effectively communicated and well collaborated. And I know this colleague very well, and he's very collaborative, but they didn't build a strategy that aligned with everyone else, and it's not going to fail, but you're going to lengthen that project time, which could be detrimental to a specific pillar to thwart any threats or any risks that may come about during that project lead time.
Earl, what are your thoughts on that? I mean, how do you balance out, strategy, tactics, and I mean, one thing I really like you said, Josh, as well, that I just want to mention is I really like if you write a good strategy, it also kind of sets priorities for your team. I always say you measure success up, sideways, down. Vendor community. Working with your partners. How do you know what to work on? I mean, everybody's getting thousands of emails every day. Every vendor wants to meet with all of us all the time. There's always urgency to 3,700 projects. What are we really going to focus on? What are our top priorities? What is it, and what are we going to put on a back burner? That's a great thing, but it's not part of our strategy right now. I mean, Earl, thoughts on that?
Yeah, I also look at things the way that Josh does. So I have this pyramid. It's like the strategic stuff at the top, operational stuff in the middle, and the really tactical stuff, underneath that. And it's kind of almost like an inverse pyramid sometimes when you think about it. But it's really about audience to me. So if what you're trying to accomplish is to get the organization aligned behind your vision of what a security program is going to look like, the audience is going to be the executives, because that's where the funding is coming from, that's where the HR support is coming from. So that strategic plan is really designed for the executives in an organization. Now, when you start to articulate that down to your team, then it becomes more of an operational plan. And you start taking some of those components out of the strategic plan and building these operational plans around those, which really aren't operational plans. They're more like project plans, but they kind of break it down into smaller components with clearer definitions and, deliverables and things like that. So really, when you think about it, it's really the audience that you're going after determines whether you're building a high level strategic plan or not. But on that, I just want to take a moment to pause here so that people listening, what is this strategic plan? Like, what does it actually look like? And so, if you go and look at what Dan did when he was at the state of Michigan, that strategic plan is like this tome of a document with a bunch of writing in it, and it's got headers and footers, and it's a document. My strategic plans were PowerPoint decks. So a strategic plan can be however you need to best format that information so that it can be consumed by the audience you're trying to give it to. So for me, it was my first strategic plan when I showed up at Lear was really just about a 20-page PowerPoint deck that talked about the the threat landscape. It talked about where we fit, and then there was a series of slides afterwards that broke it down into here's what I want the organization to look like, here's what I want, some process rebuild to be, and here's technologies that I want to bring in, and some high level estimates on pricing, not budgetary numbers, just high level directional numbers. So a strategic plan, you got to figure out your audience, and then you got to figure out what do they like to consume when you're talking to them.
I'd like to, Aaron, I want to jump over to you, but I'd like also to bring in another aspect of this, and then I want to get back to the communication piece for all of us, and how we communicate this. Again, people listening, please get your questions, and we're going to get to those in about 10 minutes. Aaron, for you, how does offensive security and tabletop exercises, testing defenses, how does that, I know you're an expert in that, how does that fit into a cybersecurity strategy?
For sure. I mean, you've got to test it, right? You create this amazing strategy and have marching orders with it. How do you know if it's working? How do you know if it's trickling down to actually rolling into here's your strategy, then your plan, then your technical implementation? Because if you create a strategy and it's just on document but nobody's following it, there's no implementation later on, what good is your plan, right? Like it needs to be taken into action. And it can come back to the communication piece as well. We often find on a lot of our tests, I mentioned earlier, a lot of people put a lot of stake in technology and people, right? Tons of phishing training. Don't click this email, and tons of tech. I have the best EDR. I have all of this because my strategy says that's what we're going to do. And they miss the process. They forget about They forget about simple things like, yeah, you patched all your servers, but you left the keys to the server sitting on one admin's workstation. I compromised it. I have his keys. I ransomware everything, right? I take over the whole network. There's those small processes that get missed. And, I know I'm going in the weeds here, but it all rolls back up to your strategy. Does your strategy properly communicate that down to the employees, to the people who need to implement this? And so having in your strategy an eventual testing of it so you can kind of change direction of the ship. It's a very hard ship to steer. It's this massive ship. You've got to get everyone on board. You can't just, be an agile and be like, we're changing the strategy today. Everyone be on board, right? You got to have that test with some results so you can come back and say, our strategy worked great in these two areas, but obviously we missed a key mark. Let's adjust here. Let's recommunicate, and we can show impact of why. I can't tell you how many pen tests and red teams I do are organizations wanting to use us to go to the board and be like, this is why we're failing, right? Like who we come in and we deliver this report of this is what we're missing. Please give us funding. I think that's a helpful part, but I think it needs to be tied into your strategy. You can't walk in, this is why we're failing. They're like, well, what's your strategy? Oh, I don't have one. You've got to come in.
No, I 100% agree with you on that because, part of the strategy has to include that piece of it. So if you don't have red teaming in your strategy, even though that sounds like a tactical step, it's actually a very strategic step because, most of what you do is you lay out your roadmap for how you're going to improve your security program is going to be people, process, technology. Well, one of those processes has to be, how are we going to articulate our progress? Now you can have metrics and say like, we've completed this project, we bought this tool, we hired these people. Those are high level metrics that, are important. But what you need, because I always think of red teaming is kind of like the fine-tuned testing that comes at the end. So when I first walked in, and we'll use Lear as an example, but in the first 2 years, it was really about building the program, and I did no red team test. I did no red teaming at that point. But after 2 years, where we thought we had tools in place, we had the team realigned, we had all that stuff. That was when we brought the red team in. And that was actually part of my strategic plan from the beginning, is that we were going to spend a couple years to build the program. And then I wanted to start bringing in threat intelligence and red teaming to, take us, beyond that first foundational improvement level. And so, I 100% agree with you that red teaming has to be a part of a strategic plan. One, because it's really important to get that inside view of what's going on and that independent view, but also it tends to be a little more expensive. And so you want to start to build that runway up to people that you're going to be paying a fair amount of money to, a Rapid7 or, a Mandiant or a CrowdStrike or somebody like that to come in and do a really good red team.
Can I ask how your first red team went too? Because that's one of the things I see customers, they implement a plan, they go through it all, then they have that first red team and, they make adjustments. How did that impact your plan after you had it or your strategy?
Well, I mean, we failed. I mean, it was a pretty quick exercise. But the thing is that I knew that was going to happen because that's why I call it fine tune testing, because you can come in and say, yeah, you have EDR, or you can come in and say, yeah, you have a SOC with some analysts. But until you actually have someone attacking your network and trying to go capture the flag and finding those weak spots, which typically are process weak spots, you can't really see that level of it. So that's why, and I was always preparing people for this. It's like, look, you can't look at a red team of saying, did we stop the red teamers or not stop the red teamers? Because typically you're not going to stop the red teamers, because most companies aren't willing to pay the amount of money that it's going to take to really stop a red teamer that's determined and dedicated. But you got to look at it as the improvement level. So the first red team sets your baseline. You get everything laid out for you, very bare and to the world, and then kind of where you can focus at along the way. But it's also why I switched my red teams every 2 years. So because I wanted a different attack methodology and I wanted a different vantage point, so that we weren't just fixing the things that those red teamers were keying on.
Yep.
Yeah,
Josh, I'd like to shift gears a little bit, jump over to you. And we talked a lot about, we used the word communication and, communicating, getting everybody involved. Talk to us about what does that look like? I mean, who needs to be involved in this? How do you communicate to people? We think of a RACI chart for those unfamiliar with that concept, but like who's responsible, who's accountable, who's going to be informed? Who's just going to be getting the email, who's going to be getting the briefing? I mean, how do you think about communication once you built a good plan, or as you're building the plan? Is the journey down the yellow brick road just as important as the destination, which is the Emerald City, or is it more just about we got to get to the Emerald City as quickly as possible?
I think it's mainly about the journey. It is because that's where you're going to build alliances. That's where you're going to build support. That's and everything. And so your strategic plan, your security strategic plan, is one piece. I'm hoping you have a communication plan as well, because that's also another piece. How are you going to communicate the effectiveness of your program to the executive board? How are you going to communicate it to your colleagues and peers? And how are you going to communicate it to the rest of the employees or your customers if you have specific regulations on communicating with your customers as well? I mean, let's just take all of the incidents that have happened, and we can dig into these specific incidents where organizations have been transparent with their customers, been transparent with their employees, have been transparent with their board and their shareholders or whatever, and they come out on top. But then there's others that have tried to sweep it under the rug and say everything's fine, and it slowly leaks out, and it slowly erodes trust. And I think communication is based on trust. If you can communicate effectively, you can start to build that trust. And we didn't talk about it, but incident response tabletop exercises are a great proactive plan to build that communication up, because you're bringing people to the table and you're working through an incident that would be high stress, but it's not high stress because it's just a simulation. And you're beginning to develop those partnerships and the relationships with other business units across the organization. And I believe that tabletop exercises and incident response definitely correlate to better business practices and better business operations, which will increase revenue over time because it's building the continuity of communication. And that's just as important as having a cybersecurity strategy within your organization.
So one of the things I would just mention here, I'll give you a little quick story from what, again, my experience is, and I want to end this with a question for Earl, and Aaron, you can jump in as well there. But so one of the things we did in Michigan was we had road shows. I'm a big believer in road shows. And say, what's a road show? What are you talking about? I mean, once you've got your strategy, and by the way, I mentioned who's involved. I mean, we talk about tabletops. I mean, there's a whole other session we've done on that. We'll probably do another one later, either later this year or next year on that topic of tabletop exercises. But we talk about legal being involved. We talk about budget being involved. We talk about customers being involved. We talk about partners being involved. Which are the key vendors you're going to work with in your organization? How are you going to partner with them? We talk about the technology people. Of course they have a role to play, but oftentimes it's the CEO, the CFO, the people making decisions. Those are the people that need to be involved. And so one of the questions I have for you, Earl, is, who then needs to be involved in the strat plan? Is it the same people as a tabletop? So but before we get to that, I want to just mention what we did with roadshows is we'd have a strategy. We'd go around. We started with the governor. We made sure it was not Dan Lorman's strategy. It wasn't the CISO's strategy. It wasn't the CIO's strategy. This was the governor's strategy. So, it was literally, okay, we and he would, believe me, he put a stamp on it too. Governor Rick Snyder did. Some other governors not quite as much, but we started at the top. So the buy-in was there at the board. The buy-in was there at the C level. But then we would rotate. We'd go around to we had 20 agencies in state government at the time. And I think it's about 18 now. They've consolidated a couple of them. But we'd go around and we'd do a presentation, the good, the bad, and the ugly. What's going on, kind of a state of the state for your agency. We talk about what's going on globally, what's going on in the United States, what's going on in Michigan, what's going on in your area. So that might be different. The Department of Education would be necessarily different than maybe transportation or criminal justice or, environmental protection, that kind of thing. But we'd present and we talk about and make that a roadshow. So we'd go around and talk to the different agencies and get their input, get that communication going. So that was very effective for us. But Earl, what are your thoughts? Who needs to be involved? Who needs to be communicated to?
Well, unfortunately, I think this is really, it depends. It kind of depends on the organization itself. In some organizations where security is thought of as a pretty critical component of the organization, you might get that broader audience. You might get in front of the board and talk about your strategic plan, as the new CISO talking to the new board or to the board. Other organizations, they really view it as an IT function, and you might get the CIO on board with the CFO and the head of HR, and that might be as far as you get to go. So it's hard to sit here and go like, hey, you got to make sure that all of these people are involved, because I talk to many CISOs, as you do, and we hear these like horror stories of just how much internal pressure these CISOs are under, depending on how the organization views security or where it even views security really setting. And so, in a perfect world, that strategic plan should go in front of the board so that the board understands, here's everything that's going to happen to protect this company, so that you're doing your due diligence as a board member to understand that cyber risk, which is going to become more and more critical as the SEC rules come out. But the reality is, in many organizations, that CISO is probably presenting that strategic plan to a CIO and a CFO, and that may be as far as they ever get with it. And we just have to kind of give those CISOs a little nod of credit that they're fighting the fight and trying to get that done.
That's a good point. Aaron, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, so going back to my early career, the roadmap, that's exactly what we did. We started with the board. Obviously, you had buy-in, you had approval, you presented this really high-level strategy, and then after that, you had to, before we presented that strategy, obviously we had the CIO buy-in, right? Being in an IT type function, like Earl said, a lot of the CISOs are in that. You can't go present something and then the CIO be like, we're not doing that. So obviously, have that buy-in, have that partnership. Get everyone on the same page at the board level so that you can move it down through the organization. And it's really hard if you don't have that buy-in. Like if you can get the highest buy-in you can get, that's where it's going to best propagate. But we really love to do those road shows to the individual organizations too and tailor it to them. So for example, finance, right? We go over to the finance department, like, we don't care about cybersecurity. Why do we care about it? Like they might care slightly, but like, we're in finance. Well, then you put numbers to it. Hey, this year there were X amount of breaches and it cost these companies in our industry this amount of money. We're spending this amount to prevent that happening, right? We tried to put it in terms that really related to them, and we did that to each group. We went along from finance, we went over to HR. Hey, people, how do we train people better? And we got their buy-in. What do you do for training? We tried to learn from them, take questions from them on how they better prep our employees, and how can we implement that same training process, get their buy-in so they can train people and during onboarding and continuously throughout the year. We didn't want it to be just us driving that, saying, here's a mandate. It had to be a partnership, and it was really done through statistics with those road shows. And then at the end of every year, we put together these different PowerPoints for each team, went on our road show, and we're like, here's the metrics. Thank you. Like, phishing went down thanks to your effort. You really appreciated that. Finance, hey, our budget's coming in pretty healthy. We might need a little more because things are going up. Breaches are occurring even more. So if you can help us out here, if you can understand that, just communicating to each of those groups and having those relationships across the entire company and going as high as you can go, but also as low as you can go with the time you have available to make everyone on the same page.
I totally agree with that, and that was what we did as well. We would target it and even got some competition going in state government. And again, we did have a little different perspective, as Earl mentioned, than maybe some other organizations, but we were not above using rankings, and we would not share who all the other people were, but where did your organization fit into the grand scheme of things. And I remember having one department director from a large agency in Michigan state government saying to us, why are we last? I mean, and they were last in a whole bunch of metrics we had. We'll get the metrics in a minute. We got an audience question on metrics coming up here. We want to hear your audience questions. We're going to get to this in a moment. In this example, they were dead last. And I remember that different agencies, some of them would have the whole executive leadership team there, would be 7 to 10 people. Others would have, everybody division level and above. We'd be briefing 40 people. So the whole management of this one, kind of a 1 hour road show for these departments. And I remember this one meeting, the executive leaders, the top 4 people, department director, a couple of the deputy directors said, Dan, stay here. We want to talk to you for another 10 minutes. Everybody left the room and they said, we cannot be going to the governor's office last. What do we need to do to be best next year? And we were ready for that question. And we walked them through, but this was an awareness campaign. It was different policies they had put in place. And I'm happy to talk about that another time, all the detailed specifics on what they were not doing that others were doing. And they had a lot of lax situations going on. And I'm happy to say that they went from worst to best in 1 year. Because management got the message, and we actually were able to modify their whole policy approach and how they were doing things in this one agency, and really turned around a really pretty scary situation. That it also helped that they just had a major data breach in that agency and had been in the papers, so that actually helped as well. But I will tell you that it was definitely effective to do a roadshow. Let me get to this audience question, and guys, you can all jump in here. Whoever wants to jump in first, I'm going to read it. Hi, Dan. Metrics are key in showing value to the organization and continued support. What are some of the metrics that have worked best to show the board the need for a shift in the approach of security strategy without seeming to be another resource whiner or whine? Sometimes you have to show the not so good to be effective. Let's start with Josh on this one, then we'll jump to Earl. Metrics, and it's actually one of the questions I was going to ask as well. How do you build metrics into this strategy?
Yeah, I think one of the best metrics is especially when you're talking about a business, is money. So how does that correlate? Like, how much money did you invest in these cybersecurity strategy, whether it be people, processes, or technology, and where do those align in the pillars of your strategy and your risk, and what did you protect? So I always look at it from security is a business enabler. Hey, we just put this email security technology in place. We hired 2 technology engineers, and we built out this process for responding or proactive response. That email is essential for us to deliver statement of works or other certain grants or whatever, and it resulted in $2.1 million of protected revenue. So being able to and we spent $50,000 on this on this technology. We spent $100,000 times 2 on people, and took 80 man hours to do the process. That shows a breakdown and a correlation to that return on investment. I don't like using return on investment because there's a huge argument that security has no ROI, but I would say return on resilience, because we're protecting $2.1 million worth of revenue coming from that risk stream. So I like really focusing on the money and communicating that up to the board.
Earl, thoughts on that? What metrics were you effective?
Yeah, so again, I just preface this by saying that metrics are just a way to tell a story. So the metrics that I use to explain the progress on a strategic plan are not the metrics that I use to just say, here's how the security program is doing. So around the strategic plan, so as we're building out these programs, a couple of the metrics are tied to what you're promising in the strategic plan. So if you say, hey, I'm going to grow the security team from 5 people to 20 people, and I'm going to do that over the course of 3 years. So, I'm going to go from 5 to 10 in the first year, and from 10 to 15, and then 15 to 20. What you need to show then is, how are you measuring against that promise? And so I had a metric that said, here are the number of roles that have been approved and not yet filled. So, we can say that we're showing progress on the hiring. The other metric is, when you walk in and your security spend is, let's just call it $1 million. And you say, well, in order to enable all this stuff that we're talking about, security spend is going to have to be $5 million. So you start to show what that ramp up is. And you say, all right, we started here at $1 million. Now we're in Q3 of the plan. And so we're at, 750,000 or whatever. And so you kind of show how that ramp up is happening. You couple that with your head count that you're bringing in. And then you also have the technology pieces where you're like, all right, we said we're going to do endpoint detection and response. So how many projects were part of that strategic plan? How many of them are in process so that we've actually started it? How many have completed, and how many have not yet started? Because that starts to show, when you compare that to the money that's being spent, if you're ramping up in money and you look over at your projects and you haven't even started your technology pieces yet, there's some red flags there that can be looked at. But that's how the metrics lay out. It has nothing to do with how many vulnerabilities there are, how many incidents you had, any of that stuff. Those are tactical or operational metrics. You're talking about strategic metrics. It's really people, money, and project execution.
Great. Real quick, I want to get to this one more question there, and then we'll do a quick wrap up, or kind of around the room here, and final thoughts, and get you out of here before the top of the hour. But a question, Aaron, if you could take a stab at this: do you use the attacks on the organization as a potential cost avoidance when talking to leadership? Any thoughts on that?
I mean, yeah, the whole point of a cybersecurity strategy is to kind come up with a way to stop the attackers, right? Like we want to stop the bad guys from getting in. We want to create a resilient organization. And so if you're an organization that's seeing an increased risk of attacks, depending on the space you're in, and you're actively seeing attacks, you don't need to go into fine details of how many incidents you said, like Earl had mentioned, but or you had that year. But going into, we have seen, just to give a high level, we've seen an increase in these types of targets against our organization. And this is why our strategy has adapted to it. These are the key parts of our strategy that are addressing that. I think you have to do that when talking to leadership, to kind of explain how your strategy is working against the industry. And the industry, at the end of the day, is what the attackers are doing, right? The attackers change their mode of operation constantly to try and get in. And your strategy has to evolve with that. So you do have to talk about the attacks that are being seen for your type of organization.
I will give one quick story, just as a quick. I agree with that. Great answer. Where that can backfire when you use the cost avoidance. And a true story that happened to me as CISO in Michigan. Once this goes back to like 2005 timeframe. Real quick story. I was trying to get spam technology deployed enterprise wide at our firewalls. I was trying to get, and we had seen one of the vendors come in and said, by stopping each of these spam messages in email, you're saving 30 seconds per employee times 50,000 employees times, do the math, yada, 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 yada. It was really this Rossi PowerPoint deck that was pretty impressive, actually, about 15-minute deck. And we were going to save $40 million a year by deploying this $200,000 device. Maybe it was $300,000. I don't know what the cost was. But I brought that to our CFO, and he just laughed. And he said, Dan, no problem. I'll give you $300,000. And, then you tell me where you're going to take $35 million out of your budget. And so that can backfire if, he was, and by the way, my budget wasn't even 35 million at the time. It was about 25 million. So he's like, so if I give you this $300,000 device, you're going to show me how you're going to save $35 million. So, and we could talk a lot more about that, just a little funny story there. But, CFOs, when you start talking about cost avoidance, be careful. Be careful how you portray it. I fell into that, the whole FUD thing, how many millions and millions of attacks we're stopping every day, every hour, every minute, every second. It's great, but that alone is not a security program. So, be wary of that. I mean, I think I always just say FUD is a good appetizer if you're uncertainty in doubt, but it's not always the main course. So be careful with that kind of thing. I want to take 1 minute, guys. We're going to wrap this up here. This has been fantastic discussion. I want to give each of you 1 minute to just do a final word of wisdom, gold nugget. If there's something that you want the audience to really take away from this, let's just say a week from now, they think back, hey, that Break Talk session, the CSO Insights with Dan and Earl and Josh and Aaron, what would be the one thing you'd want them to really remember? And I'm going to start with Aaron, go to Josh, and then Earl give you the final word. So Aaron, what one gold nugget would you leave with the audience?
One gold nugget. Well, if you don't mind, I'll just give like a quick gold nugget of a story, just like my first time implementing a strategy, and it was an absolute fail. Purely because I went in and I was so in the weeds, right? Like I was a developer. I used to do auditing. I used to do all these other things. So that's what I came in and I made my strategy these low-level details. It wasn't a strategy. It was a technical implementation. And I wrote up hundreds of pages. I spent like a month heads down working on this. I march into the room. I've got all the leaders there, all the different departments for buy-in. I'm like, here's what we're going to do. And they all looked at me like, under whose buy-in? Under like, why? What? Where do I have the budget? Where is the time? Like, I didn't understand the business part at that time. I understood, here's how we make things secure. So if there's one great takeaway, that is why you need a strategy. You need something that's high level. You have the buy-in, then work to create those things. But you can't do it bottom up. You have to start top down.
Yeah. I mean, and I would just add on to that one thing is build relationships early in the development of the plan. Your relationships with your other business units that you may not ever think that are going to be imperative for your plan to be successful. They need to be, you need to cultivate them. You need to develop a culture where security is being communicative and collaborative. I mean, you have to make some concessions in strategy and things like that. So build those relationships early and make those partnerships ironclad.
Great advice. Earl, final words.
Man, I'm going to tell you, Dan, I have been converted. This conversation has been so exciting that I now believe that strategic planning is an exciting part of the CISO job description. So, I mean, if you can't get excited putting together the story that you're going to tell the rest of the business about what you're going to be doing, then man, they might not even like that strategy. If you're not excited about the strategy, how are they going to be excited about the strategy? So by golly, you guys have converted me here today.
So get excited, be passionate. That's great. Great advice. And thank you for that. And listen, thank you to the audience. We really appreciate you joining us for another episode. I want to let you know that Earl and I will be back with another topic in 2 months on the 16th of May. We're going to be talking about risk and reward navigating cyber insurance in 2023. And that's certainly going to be a very fascinating topic. There's a lot going on in cyber insurance. We've talked in the past about the increases in premiums and the coverages and how do you qualify and all of that. We're going to get into all of that at our next episode. So I want to thank our guests, especially from Rapid7, Aaron and Josh. Thank you. Great job. Thank you, audience, for listening. Thank you for the questions coming in. And thank you to my co-host, Earl, for another great episode.
One last point.
Go ahead.
We're currently at 4,451 subscribers to this channel. Let's see if we can push that up to 4,500. So tell all your friends about this episode and get the word out there.
And great. And thank you so much. I want to also thank Bright Talk again for all their great work working with us on this. Madeline and the whole team over there doing a great job. And so thank you for all you do. And just really encourage you to come back and join us. Feel free to reach out, connect with us on LinkedIn, connect with all. I know we're happy to interact with you and love to see your questions. And until next time, we really appreciate your help and have a great day.
All right, bye.